welcome to Firstpost Vantage with me, Kaur Soroya. Let's get started. We are once again in that very specific moment where the geopolitical landscape feels tense and uncertain, and the people handling these situations are making it feel slightly less reassuring every day. On the show tonight, it appears that Donald Trump seems to think that you can just walk away from high-stakes Iran talks and somehow not own what happens next, despite the United States now moving towards a naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. This blockade is exactly as risky as it sounds, because when you further squeeze an already choked artery of the world that handles a huge chunk of global oil, the world tends to notice. Also on the show, China is urging restraint on one side while on the other quietly renaming places in Arunachal Pradesh. An attempt at being mischievous, which India called out immediately. Nice try. How about you don't try that again? And the internet has some lore for you. It's the curse of J.D. Vance. I'll tell you what it is. All this and more lined up, but first, the headlines. Now, Viktor Orbán concedes defeat in Hungary's election after 16 years in power. Peter Magyar's centre-right party wins with 77% of the votes. Pro-Europe Magyar vows to bring in a new era in the country, as Orbán's loss is seen as a blow to right-wing populism worldwide. Pope Leo says he has no intention to debate with Donald Trump. This after the US president criticized him over his comments on the US-Iran war. Trump asked the Holy See to be a pope and not a politician. Pope Leo has hit back, saying that he does not fear Trump and will continue to speak out against war. Protests by factory workers demanding a wage hike turned violent in parts of Noida. Workers from multiple industrial units gathered to press for their long-pending demand for a salary revision. However, the situation escalated as some protesters allegedly resorted to vandalism and set vehicles on fire. Several parts of the national capital region were also hit by heavy traffic congestion amid this unrest. And Australia appoints its first ever female army chief. Lieutenant General Susan Coyle currently serves as Chief of Joint Capabilities across a military career spanning nearly 4 decades. She has held multiple senior command positions. Her appointment comes as Australia pushes to increase the number of women in its armed forces. And India eyes a spot in the 2027 Formula One calendar. The government says it will offer tax relaxations to support organisers. Now, Sports Minister confirmed that efforts are already underway to clear the roadblocks here, and the Indian Grand Prix was held thrice between 2011 and 2013, but it left the country due to a taxation dispute. For a man who calls himself a master deal maker, Donald Trump seems remarkably slow to grasp the reality of the situation in West Asia. It's astonishing that he hasn't yet realized that this is one conflict that he simply can't walk away from. Iran is in no mood to give up the Strait of Hormuz. It has made that very clear. It says, "Thank you very much." And Trump's latest threats to Iran are just prime examples of being delusional. But then again, this is Trump that we're talking about. Just a few minutes ago, Trump took to Truth Social and warned that Iran attack any ships breaching US blockade will be eliminated. His grand naval blockade plan can best be described as igniting a bonfire in a fireworks factory. He is now deeper in a conflict that could cost him politically. How? Just look at the headlines today. The United States has launched the blockade of Iran's ports. The Monday deadline set by the US president for a naval blockade of Iranian ports has passed. The US military, as per its threat will begin blocking all Iranian Gulf ports. Just how will Iran retaliate to this? That remains to be seen. But earlier, in response to these US threats, Iran's military issued a counter warning. It threatened ports in the Persian Gulf.
The armed forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran explicitly and resolutely declare that the security of ports in the Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman is either for everyone or for no one. If the security of the ports of the Islamic Republic of Iran in the Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman is threatened, no port in the Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman will be safe.
Now remember, Iran has mastered the asymmetric military warfare. Over the past 45 days of this war, it has demonstrated a sophisticated multi-domain approach to this type of warfare. The American plan relies on the hope that Tehran will blink first and not target energy assets around the Gulf. Well, it couldn't be more wrong. Tehran knows the game well. Instead of hitting the United States directly, Iran is targeting America's allies in the Gulf, and the fallout isn't limited to the region. Asia and Europe have been feeling the pinch also. Today, oil prices rose above $100 per barrel once again. European gas prices have already been up over 50% since late February, with a stunning 18% rise just this week, and share markets took a nosedive. The Iran war has already triggered the risk of a stagflationary shock in Europe, with soaring energy prices and supply chain disruptions. Major economies are bracing for potential recession. Germany, Europe's biggest economy, announced relief measures, including a fuel tax cut. Chancellor Friedrich Merz told reporters that the country will feel the effects of the energy shock. I'm quoting here, for a long time to come, even after it is over. Now, the threat of two separate blockades of the Strait of Hormuz, one by Iran and the other now by the United States. It's heightened concerns about safety in the region. This situation has prompted both Europe and Asia to take action, and the UK and France appear to have a plan in place. French President Emmanuel Macron has announced that France and Britain will work together to establish a peaceful multinational mission aimed at restoring traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. Importantly, this initiative would operate separately from the involved warring parties.
As regards the Strait of Hormuz, in the coming days, together with the United Kingdom, we will organize a conference with those countries prepared to contribute alongside us to a peaceful multinational mission aimed at restoring freedom of navigation in the strait. This strictly defensive mission, separate from the warring parties to the conflict, is intended to be deployed as soon as circumstances permit.
Now, this effort has been described as peaceful and strictly defensive. Earlier, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer stated that the UK will not participate in the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, a decision that has drawn criticism from other US allies.
We're not supporting the blockade. All the time the strait is shut or not free for navigation in the way it should be. That means oil and gas is not getting to market. That means the price is going up and everybody listening to this is facing higher energy bills. I don't want that to happen. I want their energy bills to be stabilized and lower.
Now, the US position has two main implications. First, it could undermine global economic confidence by signaling that reopening the strait is less likely. Second, it affects Iran's largest oil customer, China, which is worried about potential disruptions to its oil supplies. That's why today, China called for unimpeded navigation through the strait. Chinese Foreign Ministry has urged diplomacy and a ceasefire between the United States and Iran after failed peace talks in Pakistan. He labeled reports of China supplying weapons to Iran as baseless smears, especially after Trump threatened 50% tariff. That is, of course, if China provided military assistance to Tehran.
China has always adopted a cautious and responsible attitude towards the export of military items, implementing strict controls in accordance with its own export control laws and regulations and its international obligations. We oppose baseless smears or malicious association.
Now, that's not all. Russia has also offered to take in Iran's enriched uranium as part of any peace deal. Kremlin confirmed that this proposal from President Putin still stands. No one has acted upon it yet.
Предложение было озвучено президентом Путиным. This proposal was voiced by President Putin in contacts with both the United States and regional states. The offer still stands, but has not been acted upon.
And lastly, Lebanon remains a flashpoint. The Israeli military has surrounded the key town of Bin Jubail in southern Lebanon and has initiated an assault following the deaths of over 100 Hezbollah fighters. In the past week, Prime Minister Netanyahu has emphasized that combat is concentrated here. Bin Jubail, located just 5 kilometers from the Israeli border, has long served as a symbolic and strategic flashpoint. And now, Israel is moving ahead with its plans to establish a security zone in southern Lebanon. Ultimately, energy blockades are acts of war. If in doubt, recall Pearl Harbor, which took place roughly 6 months after the US imposed a total oil embargo on Japan. These measures not only take time to show their true impact, but also escalate tensions to a breaking point. The already fragile 2-week ceasefire hangs by a thread, and it's evident that the blockade itself represents a challenge that the US may ultimately not be able to recover from. Can these tactics ever lead to a solution, or will they just further fuel the fires of war? That's the question we should be asking. So the Islamabad peace talks have failed and the ramifications are significant. Over the weekend, President Trump issued a fresh warning to Iran. Like I said, a naval blockade. His move centers around the Strait of Hormuz, which is already under restrictions by Iran. Now tonight, we take a closer look at this blockade threat, what it means, how it will work, and its impact on India. First, let's start with what Donald Trump said. In a post on Truth Social, Trump laid out his plan in detail. He said the United States will block ships entering or leaving Iran, and that it will intercept any vessel paying tolls to Tehran. This is what he said, I'm quoting here. No one who pays an illegal toll will have safe passage on the high seas. Any Iranian who fires at us or at peaceful vessels will be blown to hell. The blockade will begin shortly. Other countries will be involved with this blockade. Iran will not be allowed to profit of this illegal act of extortion. So what does this actually mean? At its core, a blockade is about control. You restrict access, you stop goods, you limit trade. And over time, you put pressure on the other side. At sea, this is enforced through naval power. Warships track vessels. They stop them, inspect them, and if needed, turn them back. The aim is simple. Make trade too risky or too costly. Now in this case, the focus is on the Strait of Hormuz. The US is not closing it completely. Ships not linked to Iran may still pass, but any vessel connected to Iran could be intercepted.
The blockade will be enforced impartially against vessels of all nations entering or departing Iranian ports and coastal areas, including all Iranian ports on the Arabian Gulf and Gulf of Oman. CENTCOM forces will not impede freedom of navigation for vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz to and from non-Iranian ports.
And the target is clear. Iran's oil trade. It is Tehran's main source of revenue. Cut that off and you cut off the war machine. But this is not just about Iran. The Strait of Hormuz is a global energy choke point. A significant share of the world's oil passes through it. So even a limited disruption will have unlimited consequences. Blockades have a history of doing exactly that. In the early 1800s, Napoleon tried to cut off Britain from European trade. The aim was to weaken Britain, but it also hurt Europe, especially France, and turned European states against Napoleon himself. Then during the First World War, Britain blocked Germany by sea. It cut off food and fuel supplies, causing severe shortages. This weakened Germany's war effort. This weakened and became one of the reasons the Allied powers won here. More recently, in the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war. Shipping in the Black Sea, it's been heavily restricted. Russia has closed key routes, disrupting Ukrainian exports, especially of grain. This has pushed global food prices up. and has triggered shortages in many countries. So, the lesson throughout history, it has been consistent. Blockades can force decisions, but they also escalate situations rather quickly. Which brings me to the global response to this threat. Iran has called this move illegal. It's described it as piracy.
The imposition of restrictions by criminal America on the movement and maritime transit of vessels in international waters is an illegal act and an instance of piracy. The armed forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran clearly and firmly declare that the security of ports in the Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman is either for everyone or for no one.
But beyond Iran, the global response is far from unified. The United States is pushing ahead for support, but its key allies are holding back. The UK and Australia say they are not supporting the blockade. Spain has called the move senseless. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron says a conference will be held to restore freedom of navigation in the strait.
The ongoing closure of the Strait of Hormuz is greatly damaging, and the restoration of the freedom of navigation is of paramount importance for us.
In fact, even China and Russia have called for unimpeded navigation. Listen to this.
The root cause of the obstruction to navigation in the strait lies in the war with Iran. The solution to this problem is an immediate ceasefire and cessation of hostilities. All parties should remain calm and exercise restraint, and China is willing to continue to play a positive and constructive role.
Now, what does all of this mean for India? Crude oil and LPG could likely face disruptions again. India imports a large share of them from the Gulf. Any disruption in Hormuz pushes prices higher. Since the war began, the government has been dealing with disruptions. It says stocks are sufficient for now. In fact, Iran says it is in contact with India. This is to keep Indian shipping moving through Hormuz. But that still does not remove the risks on the ground. Second, shipping costs could also rise again. Indian oil companies could see freight and insurance prices go up. Why? Because when shipping routes turn risky, insurers charge more. Deliveries slow down, and that makes every barrel more expensive. Third, a blockade poses inflation risks. A blockade could add to price pressures. Higher import costs do not stay with companies, they are passed on in the form of course, higher fuel prices, higher transport costs, and eventually higher prices for everyday goods. So the impact will not stop at the pump. It will spread across the economy. So this is no longer just about control of a strait. It is about who sets the rules of the sea. And when both sides are trying to enforce that control, the risk is not just disruption, it is escalation. Now, what does it cost to block the world's most important waterway? Maybe a few $1,000s and a weapon that was invented before Christopher Columbus was even born. Now, this is Iran's strategy in the Strait of Hormuz. 33 kilometers. That's all the width that separates the Persian Gulf from the rest of the world. 33 kilometers through which flows the oil that powers the world. And Iran has turned it into a minefield. The world's most critical waterway is now a maze, and nobody has the map. Reports suggest Iran has deployed multiple naval mines in these waters. These weapons are simple, cheap, and devastating. They're easy to plant, but nearly impossible to find. So what exactly are they? Sea mines are underwater explosive devices. They are designed to damage or destroy ships and submarines. They can remain hidden for long periods, waiting for the right moment to strike. The idea behind the weapon is centuries old, but the technology has evolved into something far more precise and dangerous. There are several types of sea mines. Contact mines are the simplest. They explode when a ship physically hits them. These are the classic floating spheres, often tethered just below the surface. Then there are influence mines. These are more advanced. They don't need contact. Instead, they detect a ship's presence through its sound, pressure, or it can be magnetic field. There are also drifting mines, which move unpredictably with ocean currents. And then, moored mines. You must have seen them in movies. A metal sphere just below the water's surface, anchored to the seabed by a cable. These mines don't sit on the ocean floor, they hover at a set depth, right where a ship's hull is likely to pass. And then there are mines which sit on the seabed. These are called the bottom mines, and they're often buried or hidden. The US says Iran has 5,000 to 6,000 naval mines. These include both contact mines like moored and influence mines like bottom mines. Now, the Strait of Hormuz is a shallow waterway. Much of the strait has a depth exceeding 45 meters. And here's why this detail is important. The strait's depth makes it suitable for moored and bottom mines. Iran has both, and reports suggest that Iran has deployed around a dozen mines in the region. The variety of the mines here is not known. Individually, a single mine may not always sink a massive oil tanker, but that's not the point. Even limited damage can halt a vessel, block a narrow lane, and trigger widespread disruption. We've seen it before. In 1988, during the war with Iraq, Iran mined the strait. It planted 150 sea mines at the same time. One moored mine struck the American frigate's USS Samuel B. Roberts, nearly sinking it. That is the kind of impact that we're talking about. But the real power of sea mines lies elsewhere, in how difficult it is to detect them. Recent reports suggest Iran may not even know where all its mines are. Some may have been deployed without precise tracking. Others could have drifted away with currents. And underwater, that becomes a nightmare. Because you're not just searching across distance, you're also searching across depth. A mine cleared today could reappear tomorrow. A drifting mine could enter a previously safe zone. Some remain buried, invisible to the eye. This makes mine hunting one of the most complex naval operations. But there are two approaches to hunt these mines. First, mine sweeping. It means dragging equipment through the water to trigger or cut mines. Second, mine hunting, using sonar and remote systems to detect and neutralize them one by one. The United States is now deploying advanced underwater drones like the Knifefish and the Kingfish. The Knifefish is a large autonomous underwater drone. It is built specifically for detecting hidden naval mines in complex environments. It can navigate on its own, and it is designed for deeper, high-risk zones where divers can't safely operate. The Kingfish, on the other hand, it's smaller, modular, unmanned underwater vehicle. It is designed for flexibility and rapid deployment. It produces detailed images, making it easier to identify mine-like objects. No one knows how successful they've been so far. And that's the genius of it. Iran knows that it doesn't need these mines to sink 100 ships. It just needs the world to wonder, is it safe to sail through? That uncertainty alone is enough to rattle markets, reroute tankers, and redraw the economics of global energy. Fear is the weapon, mines are just the delivery system. Now let's talk about the global markets. They've taken a hit again today. And the reason is clearly what happened over the weekend. So now the outlook has shifted from hope back to uncertainty. And markets do not like that. Take a look at what happened with oil. When Donald Trump threatened a naval blockade on Iran, oil prices shot up again. Brent crude is back above $100 a barrel today. It is up more than 7% in just one session. But this is not just a one-day move. Oil has been climbing for weeks. It is now up more than 40%. This is since shipping through Hormuz Strait was disrupted. So what is driving the surge? It all comes down to supply. The United States is now trying to block Iran's oil flows. And that puts one of the key suppliers at risk. Iran exports close to 2 million barrels a day. So even a partial disruption can tighten global supply. Meanwhile, shipping through Hormuz is already under strain. Tankers are avoiding the route and movement is slowed. So traders are pricing in all of these risks. And this oil shock is spreading fast. Look at how the global markets reacted today. They've fallen. In the United States, the Wall Street indices opened lower. The S&P 500, Dow Jones and Nasdaq futures are all dropping. In Europe, the reaction is similar. France's CAC 40 is down about 1%. Germany's DAX has fallen around 1%. At the same time, London's FTSE 100 is down about 0.5%. Asia is no different. Japan's Nikkei closed down 0.7% and Hong Kong Hang Seng fell around 0.9%. And South Korea's Kospi, it slipped close to 1%. Let's move to India then. The BSE Sensex and Nifty 50 fell around 1% each. Investors lost lakhs of crores in a single session. And the reason is linked to oil. Like I said before, India is highly exposed to oil. It imports most of its crude oil. So when prices rise, the impact is immediate. Higher import bills, pressure on the rupee and rising inflation risks. In fact, the rupee has weakened again. It closed at 93.37 per US dollar. So in short, what we are seeing today is a global sell-off. It's not limited to any one region, and it is not just about oil or equities. Look at gold. Gold prices have also fallen today, which may sound unusual during a crisis. Usually, gold rises when uncertainty increases, but this time it is under pressure. Why? Because of the interest rates. Higher oil prices mean higher inflation, and that means central banks may keep rates high for longer. When interest rates stay high, gold becomes less attractive because it does not pay any interest, and that is why prices are slipping. Even silver is down, falling about 2.4% today. And look at the US dollar. It is moving higher. Investors are moving into safer assets, and the dollar is one of them. So money is flowing out of risky markets and into the dollar. That is putting pressure on other currencies.
Markets started weakly into the new week, but luckily not as weak as feared by some, given that the talks between Iran and US broke up, and also given that the President, Donald Trump, announced that the US is willing to completely block the Strait of Hormuz. So we see a slightly muted reaction by financial markets.
Now this pressure is starting to show up in economies, and governments are now starting to respond to it. Germany has announced 1.6 billion euros or 1.9 US dollars in fuel relief. This is to support households and businesses that are dealing with this energy shock.
First of all, we have decided to provide relief for citizens in light of rising fuel prices. We will reduce the energy tax, that is the mineral oil tax on diesel and petrol, by approximately 17 euro cents per liter for 2 months. This will very quickly improve the situation for motorists and businesses across the country, and above all for those who travel a great deal by car, primarily for work-related reasons. This applies to employees as well as to businesses.
In the Philippines, President Ferdinand Marcos has moved to cut taxes on LPG and kerosene. This is to ease the impact of rising fuel prices. So this is no longer just about prices, it is about uncertainty and how long it lasts. Because what started as an oil shock is now spreading across markets and into economies too. And that is the real risk ahead. This weekend, all eyes were on Islamabad. One city, two rival negotiating teams and one goal: to somehow strike a deal to end the Iran war. I'm sure you know how it ended. Both teams left Islamabad without a deal. They held intense face-to-face talks for close to 21 hours. Yet, there was no breakthrough. So what exactly happened in Islamabad? And where did things go wrong? Let's begin at the top. The Iranian delegation landed on Friday night. It had 86 members and was led by Iran's parliament speaker, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf. He was accompanied by Iran's foreign minister and central bank governor. Several journalists and legal experts also traveled with him. Top Pakistani officials welcomed them on the tarmac. Foreign Minister Ishaqdar, Army Chief Asim Munir personally greeted them. As you can see there, Munir was in full military fatigue. And look at the Iranian team, all of them wearing black, the color of mourning. Plus, Ghalibaf was spotted with a special pin. A pin with the picture of former Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. Inside the plane, there was another message. The Iranian plane seats had pictures of 168 school children. The same children who were killed in a US airstrike on Minab. In fact, the Iranian team was called Minab 168. Meanwhile, the US delegation arrived on Saturday morning. Their team had more than 300 members. But 3 of them are important to note. Vice President J.D. Vance, who led the delegation, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, and Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner. They too were personally welcomed by top Pakistani officials. But this time, Munir had a change of attire. He dished the military fatigue for a formal suit. And fun fact, both teams landed at the Noor Khan Air Base, the same base that was hit by India during Operation Sindoor. I guess they finally fixed that runway. On Saturday, all the focus was on the Serena Hotel. This is where the talks were scheduled to happen. And before that, both delegations met Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. They passed on messages for the other side. Now, before the talks started, there was a lot of confusion. Would there be direct or indirect talks? Will Pakistan be in the room? Will documents and drafts be exchanged? Nobody knew what to expect. As it turned out, there were direct negotiations, meaning the United States and Iranian teams were in the same room. Reports say J.D. Vance shook hands with Ghalibaf. Overall, the mood has been described as cordial and calm. Even Donald Trump admitted this. Look at his assessment. I'm quoting again. My 3 representatives became, not surprisingly, very friendly and respectful of Iran's representatives, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, Abbas Araghchi and Ali Bagheri. By all accounts, things were cordial. No outbursts and no shouting contests. Having said that, details are really tough to come by. The talks happened behind closed doors. Plus, the media was not allowed inside the hotel. Both American and Iranian reporters were at the Jinnah Convention Center. They were completely shut out from the talks. The idea was to plug any leaks or insider scoops. Still, some information has come out. I'll bring you the top 3 highlights. Number 1, Vance was in constant contact with President Donald Trump. He spoke to Trump about half a dozen times. Interestingly, the president wasn't at the White House. He was in Miami watching a UFC match. Number 2, the Iranians came with detailed documents and proposals. One such document talked about nuclear safety. Reports say it ran into more than 300 pages. Tells you why the talks lasted around 21 hours. And number 3, the discussions happened across several rounds and formats. Again, the exact details are not clear, but chances are some rounds involved technical teams, others involved political leaders. As the talks unfolded, there was some initial optimism. Some reports hinted at extending the talks by 1 day. But overnight, things broke down. On Sunday morning, J.D. Vance addressed a press conference. He revealed that no deal had been struck.
The bad news is that we have not reached an agreement, And I think that's bad news for Iran much more than it's bad news for the United States of America. So we go back to the United States having not come to an agreement. But the simple fact is that we need to see an affirmative commitment that they will not seek a nuclear weapon, and they will not seek the tools that would enable them to quickly achieve a nuclear weapon. That is the core goal of the President of the United States, and that's what we've tried to achieve through these negotiations.
Vance then flew back to the United States. Shortly after, the Iranian team also left. Unlike Vance, they did not speak to the media. So what exactly led to this breakdown? For starters, a longer negotiation doesn't signal success. There are long and complicated documents involved. Even reading them can take hours. Plus, both sides came with preconceived notions. Iran thinks it has leverage because of the Strait of Hormuz. The US thinks it has leverage because of a strong military performance. So both sides came to dictate terms. And finally, don't forget how complicated the issue is. The 2015 nuclear deal was negotiated over 2 years. So it is impossible to negotiate a new one in 21 hours. This will have to be a steady process. Having said that, do we know what the sticking points are? Officially, Vance mentioned nuclear enrichment. The US wants Iran to give up all enrichment capabilities. It also wants them to surrender the uranium stockpile. Beyond that, reports mention two key issues. One is the future of the Strait of Hormuz. Iran wants to control and toll this waterway, something that is not acceptable to the Americans. And secondly, the issue of frozen reserves. Around $100 billion worth of Iranian assets are frozen, meaning the regime cannot access them. In Islamabad, there was no agreement on this issue. Basically, how much of these assets will be unfrozen as part of this deal? And what about Iran's missiles and proxies? These issues have not been mentioned. They have been mentioned, but not as core problems. Trump himself says only one point matters, that of Iran's nuclear program. As things stand, we do not know what will happen next. A breakthrough was always unlikely in the first round of talks. But there is some good news. Both sides know where the other side stands. They know the red lines and core demands. So hopefully now, the real diplomacy can begin. Call it coincidence, call it spectacularly bad timing, but a strange pattern seems to follow J.D. Vance wherever he goes. Yes, the Vice President of the United States. From high-stakes diplomacy that leads nowhere to public moments that quite literally fall apart, and even global events taking a grim turn soon after his visit. None of it may be connected, yet all of it is rather hard to ignore. The internet likes to call it the curse of J.D. Vance. Our next report explains.
Let's talk about the increasingly suspicious, mildly chaotic, and frankly, cinematically unfortunate phenomenon the internet is calling the curse of J.D. Vance. Now, to be fair, J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States of America, isn't actually cursed. That would require either supernatural endorsement or at the very least a haunted amulet. As far as we know, he's only carrying a Senate resume and some really bad scheduling luck. But if you were to line up the events surrounding our God-fearing good American J.D. Vance, timing does not appear to be on his side. It's a tale as old as April 14, 2025. During a White House celebration, Vance handles a championship trophy from Ohio State University and promptly fumbles it. Not metaphorically, literally drops the trophy, which is the sporting equivalent of a best man dropping the wedding cake. It doesn't ruin the event, but it does make everyone quietly reassess your motor skills. But that is just an innocent mistake, right? And then came Easter Sunday, April 20th, 2025. J.D. Vance meets Pope Francis at the Vatican. An encounter with the pontiff he would go on to describe as a great honor and a sign from God. Less than 24 hours later, the Pope passed away. Talk about sign from God. Now, obviously, correlation is not causation. People meet the Pope all the time. But being one of the last people to meet him is not a great look for your cosmic Yelp reviews. The very next day, US Vice President J.D. Vance made his first official 4-day visit to India, from April 21 to April 24, 2025. Vance arrives, and tragedy strikes in Pahalgam. Again, this is where we emphasize these are serious, unrelated events. No one is suggesting causation. But if you were writing a horror screenplay, you may want to introduce some subtlety. And then came the negotiations over the weekend. Location, Pakistan. Expectation, a breakthrough. Outcome, everyone goes home. Nothing resolved, no deal. But let's not judge. J.D. Vance is not one to not cheer on his friends, and he did exactly that for Viktor Orban, a man who had been in power for 16 years in Hungary. 16 years. That's not a political term. That's membership at this point. And then shortly after, Orban loses. Again, not caused by Vance. But if you were Orban, you might want to tell Mr. VP respectfully, could you maybe support someone else next time?
It's a good occasion to exchange.
If reports are anything to go by, J.D. Vance invited Pope Leo XIV to the US this June. The Pope declined. Now, of course, the pontiff does not accept every invite, but when you combine this with the previous papal encounter, it starts to feel less like scheduling and more like divine ghosting. So what is the Vance curse? Well, it's a perfect storm of unfortunate timing, high visibility, and the internet's favorite hobby, pattern recognition gone feral. Put them together, and suddenly it feels like Vance is the political equivalent of a Final Destination premonition. Online, this has turned into a full-blown meme ecosystem. The narrative is rather simple. If J.D. Vance is coming to your event, maybe just reschedule. Because the truth is, politics is already chaotic. Add a streak of bizarre coincidences, and suddenly you've got an urban legend.
Now, our next story is on a nation that mistakes fantasy as reality. I'm talking about China. This is a country whose favorite hobby is renaming Indian territory. And like all bad habits, it just can't quit. This isn't new. This isn't even surprising. Let me give you some context. China has created a new county in Xinjiang province. It is called the Chenling County. Now, this Chinese-claimed county sits at the high-altitude crossroads. It's where the Karakoram Range meets the borders of Afghanistan and Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, and close to India's Ladakh. It's a geopolitically sensitive zone, and this is the third time in over a year that China has pulled this move. And amid these reports, India has released a strongly worded statement. Spokesperson Randhir Jaiswal called it out for exactly what it is: fictitious names, false claims, baseless narratives. You want to understand Beijing's strategy on borders? China has been running this playbook for decades. Here it is, in plain language: build, name, and claim. First, you build infrastructure, roads, bridges, villages deep inside disputed territory or enemy territory. Then you give those places Chinese names. Then you print those names on maps. Then you hand those maps to the world and say, see, this is ours. It's not military aggression in the traditional sense. It's something more insidious. It's cartographic warfare. And China has been waging it relentlessly for years. Ask the Uyghurs of Xinjiang. Ask the fishermen of the South China Sea, whose waters are now bear fictitious Chinese names on Chinese maps, distributed by Chinese diplomats at international forums. This is their method. And India's Arunachal is no different. China calls it South Tibet. It dates back to claims made by Mao Zedong, and it is guided by his five-finger theory. He called Tibet the right-hand palm of China, and that palm had 5 fingers. It includes Ladakh, Nepal, Sikkim, Bhutan, and Arunachal Pradesh. But the reality is, Arunachal is not South Tibet. It has never been South Tibet. The McMahon Line, drawn in 1914, clearly demarcates Arunachal as Indian territory. China never accepted it. But non-acceptance is not the same as ownership. I can refuse to accept that the sun rises in the east. It still will. India has governed this land for 75 years. People vote here, children go to school here. The Indian flag has flown over Tawang since 1951. Now in 2017, China renamed 6 places in Arunachal. In 2021, 15 more. In 2023, another round. In 2024, it came up with 30 more names for places in Arunachal Pradesh.
We have time and again spoken about this issue. We have made a couple of statements in the last month, last few weeks. Each time we have reiterated our position. So I would refer you to look at our statements that we've done. Just by naming something, you don't change the reality. The reality is what it is. Arunachal Pradesh is an integral part, inalienable part of India, and it will remain so.
That was New Delhi's response from 2024. Each time India rejects it, each time China ignores the rejection and moves on. Because for Beijing, this isn't about immediate results. It's about the slow drip of repetition. That's the propaganda it spews. Say a lie long enough, print it on enough maps, teach it in enough schools to enough children, and hope that the world recognizes it. Now, India's response this time carried an additional edge. The MEA warned that these actions, and I'm quoting here, detract from ongoing efforts to normalize bilateral ties. Remember, since the Galwan clashes, both nations have been trying to fix the bond. Diplomatic talks, military disengagement, and in the middle of all that, China has continuously renamed Indian territory. Now, Beijing loves to rename places. It does it to Indian cities in Arunachal. It does it casually and confidently without anyone asking. So we thought, what if Indians returned the favor? What would you rename Chinese cities? We asked and you delivered. Take a look. Now, let me be blunt about what China is doing. This is a deliberate, state-sanctioned provocation. India has been firm. Vain and preposterous attempts. That was May 2025. Fictitious, mischievous, false. That is right now. The legal ground beneath Beijing's feet is quicksand. China's claim on Arunachal is built on fantasy, enforced through fantasy, and deserves to be treated exactly like that. A fantasy. Now picture this, it's a quiet Saturday afternoon in Kampala. A 4-star general sits down with his phone. He opens X and decides to conduct foreign policy on social media in a thread. This is General Muhoozi Kainerugaba, Uganda's Chief of Defense Forces. He had demands for Turkey, big ones, $1 billion and the most beautiful woman in that country as his wife. He gave Ankara 30 days to comply. He threatened to shut Turkey's embassy in Kampala. He advised all Ugandans to avoid travelling to Turkey for their safety. He then offered to deploy 100,000 Ugandan troops to defend Israel. Now, before you simply laugh and move on, there's actually a legitimate grievance here. It is buried somewhere beneath the theatre. So here's the backstory. Stay with me. Uganda has been one of the largest troop contributors to African Union missions in Somalia since 2007. For nearly 2 decades, thousands of soldiers were deployed. Hundreds of lives have been lost fighting Al-Shabaab. This is an Al-Qaeda affiliate, and it has terrorized the Horn of Africa for years. This is where Turkey enters the picture. While Ugandan boots were on the ground bleeding, Turkey was busy building. Over $1 billion in Turkish aid, investment and infrastructure poured into Somalia. And this started roughly back in 2014. Ankara constructed schools, it built hospitals, diplomatic missions. Mogadishu's seaport is Turkish operated. Mogadishu's airport is run by a Turkish company. It cultivated deep political ties with Somali leadership. Turkey essentially turned Somalia into one of its most valuable African partnerships. So Uganda was doing the security heavy lifting. It made investment possible in the first place. And who was reaping the financial benefits? Turkey. That asymmetry is real. The frustration is valid. Uganda and other African Union troop contributors have long felt that the international community takes their sacrifice and then writes a check to someone else. So the general had a point. He just chose to make it in the most spectacularly sexist way imaginable. Because here's the thing, when you're demanding the country's most beautiful woman as part of a diplomatic ultimatum, it doesn't get you taken seriously. It might get you 1 million views. It transforms a historical grievance into a punchline. Turkey has not officially responded, but it has the ultimate high ground. And this is remarkably not General Muzi's first rodeo. In 2022, he offered 100 cows to Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. Do you know why? It was a marriage proposal. In the same breath, he threatened to capture Rome if she declined. That same year, he threatened Kenya. He declared his army could take Nairobi in under 2 weeks. President Museveni, who happens to be his father, was forced to issue a formal apology. You see, General Muhoozi is not a fringe figure. He is Uganda's top military commander. He is also the son of a president who has ruled for nearly 4 decades. He is widely regarded as the heir apparent to one of Africa's most entrenched political dynasties. So the world notices, even when he speaks recklessly, especially when he speaks recklessly. And his remarks undermine Uganda's story. The country gets reduced to the butt of a global joke. The post eventually was deleted, but the internet, as it always does, remembered. That is the cruel irony of governing by social media. You get the virality you want, but you rarely get to choose what it says about you. General Muhoozi wanted the world to know Uganda was owed a debt. Instead, the world is debating what most beautiful means in a diplomatic context. That is not a win, not even close. Uganda deserves better advocates for its cause. Somalia's stability remains fragile. It was built in part on Ugandan blood and sacrifice. That story deserves to be told, loudly and seriously, and without any mention of matrimonial demands. For now, though, Ankara's embassy remains open. The Turkish airline flights are still running. And somewhere in Kampala, a general is presumably drafting his next proposal. I'm sure we were all told in our childhood, study hard, pick a field, climb the ladder, and you'll have a career worth living for. It was predictable, it was guaranteed to give you success and stability in life. But the world has changed. Artificial intelligence is not just changing jobs. It is also changing the way careers are built. Today, job paths are no longer straight lines. They are zigzags. People are switching industries, roles, and skill sets, and constantly reinventing themselves just to stay relevant. And as a result, a term now gaining traction is zigzag careers. We haven't come up with this term. It has been coined by you in friends circles, in workplace conversations. For those who are not chronically online, allow me to explain. It describes a generation that refuses to stay in one box, or worse, can't afford to. If in the old model of career trajectory, one climbed upwards, in this one moves sideways, one diversifies, one stacks skills, and that's how one becomes valuable in the job market. So an engineer today can also be a journalist or a strategist or a writer. A corporate employee can be a YouTube creator or influencer on the side. A fitness trainer might also be driving a cab to diversify income. One adapts because the disruption is already here. Jobs are vanishing. Recent reports suggest that entry-level job postings have fallen by almost 30% since January 2024. 39% of the workers' core skills will change or become obsolete by 2030, thanks to AI and technology adoption. And 85% of future jobs have not even been created yet. Think about that. Nearly half of your skills that you work so hard to master may not matter in a few years. And most future jobs haven't even been invented. First, it came for the entry level. Then for the middle management. Is the backbone of corporate structure. And that is also being dismantled. As companies are automating, by 2026, 1 in 5 companies are expected to use AI to eliminate layers of management. But here's the thing about this AI race. It doesn't just target beginners and middle management. Even specialists and experts are facing the heat now. I'm talking about people with decades of experience. So where does that leave the workforce? Restless and rethinking everything. Especially in India. India is becoming an important player in the gig economy, with the Niti Aayog report showing a 21% growth in this sector year on year. Gig and freelance workers and work are now essential parts of the workforce, not just as side jobs. Young people in India are more selective about their careers, often choosing flexible, project-based roles that offer better work-life balance. The idea of job stability is changing, and many people are realizing that being adaptable can also give them a sense of security. For businesses, this is a win because they want flexibility, lower costs, and workers with diverse skills. It can be good for workers too. If you leverage your unique skills, you can find more satisfying jobs and potentially earn more money. You can choose work that matches your interests and career goals, giving you more freedom instead of being stuck in a typical 9 to 5. That's why many young professionals are opting to build multiple income streams instead of relying on a single job. The reality is this: knowing one thing is no longer enough. Like it or not, the straight career path is fading. The zigzag is taking over. And it rewards jack of all trades. So the real question is, are you ready for change before your job does? And for our last story, let's talk about the fruit that defines Indian summers. I'm talking about mango. India produces nearly half the world's mangoes, 228 million tons this year alone. Yet it exports less than 1% of it. The internet just found that out. It's losing its mind. They cannot comprehend how it happens. But Indians aren't giving up their mangoes. Like one post summed it up on X, we aren't ready yet to open the Strait of Mangoes. For our next report, we'll tell you more about this king of fruits.
Let's start with the statistic that sends social media into a spiral. India grows roughly 43% of all the mangoes on earth. Yet, it exports only about 1% of that. Why is that? It's because India is home to 1.4 billion people, and to them, mango isn't just a fruit. It's an emotion. India's domestic mango market is worth $32.3 billion, growing at 7% every year since 2012. So the rest of the world may be fighting over mango imports, but India is basically saying, sorry, we ate them. But India's love affair with the mango is not new. Fossil evidence puts the mango in northeast India, Myanmar and Bangladesh 25 to 30 million years ago. By 2000 BCE, it was already in the Vedas. The Puranas called mango trees celestial. Emperor Ashoka specifically ordered mango groves planted along his highways. Across the entire Mughal dynasty, the one tradition that passed untouched from Babur to Bahadur Shah Zafar was the love for mangoes. Like Akbar, who once planted 100,000 mango trees in one orchard. By the 16th century, the Portuguese arrived in Goa and they took the mango global. The word mango itself comes from the Portuguese manga, borrowed from the Tamil mangai. The Alfonso is named after Afonso de Albuquerque, the Portuguese commander who colonized Goa. From India, mango spread east to Africa, Brazil, Jamaica, Hawaii, and eventually America. Now, in most countries, mango is just something you buy. But in India, it's a lot more. It's childhood. It's summer holidays. It's sticky hands and messy faces. From mango shake to pickles to raw slices with salt and chili, every household has its own mango ritual. So when mango season hits, the country basically goes into collective consumption mode. India produced 228 lakh metric tons of mangoes this year. That's nearly 250 million tons. It also has 1,000+ varieties. Uttar Pradesh eats dasheri and langra. Maharashtra goes to war over the Alfonso. Gujarat swears by Kesar. Bengal is loyal to the Himsagar. Andhra Pradesh will fight you if you insult the Banganapalli and then pickle it for good measure. Which is why its exports are just a tiny slice. 23,000 tons of fresh mangoes and 109,000 tons of pulp. That's basically crumbs compared to what we grow. And it's not just consumption. Cold chain logistics for a tropical fruit across continents is expensive. India's mangoes face strict sanitary rules in Western markets. The US and Japan require vapor heat treatment or irradiation before entry, which adds cost and some argue dulls the flavor. But the real answer is actually a lot simpler. India doesn't need to export mangoes. The domestic demand is so steep, so deep, so emotionally entrenched that the marginal return on export doesn't compete. Where India does dominate globally is mango pulp. It controls over 55% of the world's mango pulp market. West Asia, the UK, the US, they all get the processed version. Fresh Alfonso? That stays right here at home. So the next time you wonder why the world barely gets Indian mangoes, remember this. It's not that India won't share, it's just that there's nothing left to share. The king of fruits stays in the kingdom.
Now, looks like Donald Trump is trying everything to unblock the Strait of Hormuz. Threats? Check. Truth Social posts? Check. Memes? Absolutely. At this point, Trump's strategy seems less like geopolitics and diplomacy and more like throwing Wi-Fi routers at the problem and hoping one connects. The internet, of course, is having a field day, turning him to a Bollywood-style revenge ghost and even putting him in a diplomatic pickle with Benjamin Netanyahu. The crisis may not be resolved yet, but one thing's clear. Global tensions are rising, and so is the meme quality. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell a story. Artemis 2 astronaut Christina Koch gets a tail-wagging hero's welcome at home. A Miami hotel vanishes in seconds after a dramatic controlled implosion. And a Japanese volcano erupts, hurls towering ash plume into the sky. Finally, taking you back in history, on this day in 1990, the Jallianwala Bagh massacre took place. British troops led by Reginald Dyer opened fire at thousands of unarmed Indians in Amritsar. Over 2,000 people were either killed or sustained injuries. The massacre became a turning point in India's freedom fight. We leave you on that note. Thank you so much for watching. See you tomorrow.